Hey there, it is Thumbcock on the behalf of ipguitars once again. Now, in this video, we're going to be taking a look at what are all the key things to look out for whenever doing maintenance on other people's instruments. In this case in point, I had the Finnish Melodic Death Metal band Deatherby coming in to get all of their gear worked on. They were heading into the studio, so they wanted to make sure that all their instruments would be playing exactly how they want them to, so that nothing would hamper progress when in the studio. Studio time can be expensive and recording processes can be long days, so whatever I can do to make that easier, make the playing as easy as possible, is of course for the better. Now, whenever you're working on other people's instruments, the first things to take into account and have a look at, other than just looking them over, is make sure what tuning they're in, what the action is, how the electronics are working, and like you see here, making sure the necks are straight. Of course, there might be some people who want a little bit of relief in their neck, so it's nice to also kind of check if they had a sort of personal preference to this. Just talk to your customers. If you have any questions about anything, do not hesitate to ask. Always better to ask than to assume. Now, in the case of this first one up, this is a Raato Emperor V. Beautiful instrument. And you might recognize this from the Workshop Vibes videos I did a little while back. It has a little bit of fret rock, so this is me just using the fret rocker to kind of check where I find any sort of rocking, then deal with the frets that are causing some issues. Here we see that the 11th fret was a little proud. It was also popping up at the ends, so I'm using some very low viscosity super glue, getting it into the hole, some accelerator, and pressing things down to make sure that we get everything nicely sticking. Once the fret is sitting in its slot, as it should be, just cleaning up all the excess with a sharp razor blade, making sure with the fret rocker if there's any more rock that needs to be taken into account. There was a little bit more, so filing away. And once all the filing is done, we want to make playing feel great. So we can't have file marks all over the place. It's time to polish up all those frets. Make sure that they're a mirror shine, making it easy for the player, just gliding away playing. Then I cleaned up the fretboard with some isopropyl alcohol and conditioned it with some fretboard oil. This is going to be a fairly common theme that you'll see throughout all these instruments that I'm going to be working on this time around. The Raato V in every other record, fairly straightforward. This is a guitar that I have worked on previously, so it was easy enough to just check if there had been any movement from the last time I saw it a couple of months back. Then of course, it's not just about making it play well, making it feel great. You also kind of, while you have the guitar in pieces or strings off, you might as well just clean the entire guitar, make sure that it's nice and damage-free, there's no grease stains anywhere, no fingerprints. Just make it look, feel great for the player, because a lot of the times whenever a guitar both looks great and feels great, the musician will also play a little better. It's a sort of subconscious thing. So while you have everything up in pieces, just make sure to clean everything up. And without further ado, all the electronics are working, intonation's working. Let's move on to the next one. This one is a Solar. I can't remember the serial number for it, but once again, it had a little bit of issues with electronics. So I'm just checking the tuning on here first, making sure to write that down so I get the same tuning. Checking the electronics, so making sure that the pot works. There's a little bit, well, I say a little bit, there's a lot of wiggle, which means that the nut probably isn't properly screwed in. So we're going to tighten that up. making sure that all the pickup positions work, making sure the volume pot works. Making sure that the second voicing on these fishmans works as it should. Now what I'm doing here is I'm listening for any sort of like feedback or static or roughness. With the strings off, it's time to just wipe all the dust away with a microfiber cloth to make sure that we actually have a nicely clean guitar to work with. And also, you know, makes it nicer for the player. Yep, the washer on here, or the nut on here was way too loose, so we're just going to tighten that down and then put the knob back on. There we go. Much better. Feels a lot smoother to play. Now, there was a little bit of grounding issues, so now I'm just trying to find where that issue might be. The output looks great. All the solder points look okay. There's nothing to kind of get worried about here. However, I did notice that there was one ground wire which wasn't attached to anything. It was just floating around. So that's what we need to kind of fix. First, we're going to solder up the wire itself so we get a good contact. And put it with the rest of the grounds into this ground point here. And then just tapping the QC past. Kind of wondering how that QC was passed with this sort of issue found in it. So wiping everything down, using some finishing cleaner, guitar cleaner, just to clean everything up, make sure everything is fingerprint free, looking nice, feeling nice, and we have a clean guitar to work with. Cleaning up the fretboard and polishing up the frets. It's time to string everything up again. So fresh strings on, or in this case, I think this guitar actually had the same strings. The new strings were going to come on later, but I still need to do all the setup anyway. So we're going to work on the intonation, make sure that the guitar intonates properly. It was a little sharp, so I had to move saddles back in a lot of places. Very important to drop your pick and then drop your screwdriver afterwards. Can't do proper maintenance without dropping stuff. As long as it's not the instruments you're working on, of course. Drop your tools all you want, but don't drop the customer's instruments. Checking how the electronics are working. Everything's sounding a lot better, a lot cleaner. I'm only running things through a tiny orange micro terror, but that's more than enough for me to kind of figure out if there's any issues with the electronics on hand. There we go. Second guitar, done. Next up, we're gonna move on to the bass world. So here's this lovely six string. And there wasn't too much to do on this one. Just checking that all the electronics work. Tons of buttons and tons of EQ to kind of work with. Trying to make sure that I don't really change settings all too much. Again, checking the tuning and writing down each string, making sure that I don't change the tuning at all. Removing the strings. This one made super easy with the type of bridge that it has. I am noticing that the saddles are moving quite a bit, so that's something I do need to kind of take into account. The fretboard and frets were pretty dirty, so again, using some isopropyl alcohol to just kind of rub away all that dirt and grime. It's great to remove any sort of stuff you have on a fretboard. However, you do need to keep in mind that the isopropyl alcohol will dry the fretboard up quite a bit, so be sure to oil the fretboard properly after the fact. Once again, wiping away all the excess dust, because we have the strings off, might as well. And then checking how the neck is. Is it straight? Do we need to adjust? Yes, we do. A tiny, tiny bit of adjustment on the truss rod just to make this feel a little bit nicer to play with a tiny, tiny bit of relief. So arrow straight isn't always the best option. Going with a tiny bit of relief can actually help a lot to make the guitar or instrument feel a little nicer to play. So plenty of oil on this Wenge fretboard. Letting that sit for a little bit, buffing away all the excess. And then doing the final sort of polish on the frets. Now, the reason why you polish up frets is just so that there's absolutely no sort of resistance when you're kind of playing, moving around the fretboard, or doing bends especially. The smoother the fret, the much easier it feels to play. So you're not kind of fighting against any sort of dents or scrapes or scratches on the frets themselves. And again, tuning things up. The good thing is that these saddles were a little loose, so it was easier for me to actually move them back and forth and get the intonation absolutely perfect before screwing things down, making sure that those saddles don't move anywhere. There we go. Nicely solid bass, nicely tuned up and intonated. On to the next one. So the next victim we have is a Solar V. This one is going to get a little bit more work done. So you might have noticed that I actually took up two projects, or I took up three instruments beforehand that were a little easier to deal with, and now I'm getting stuck into the ones that require a little bit more work. So again, starting off with checking how the action is, how the neck is, making sure that I don't change those whatsoever. Checking up the electronics. Now we're going to be changing the electronics on this guitar, so it doesn't really matter too much. What I'm doing right here is actually checking how the frets are playing, because there was a little bit of fret buzz, or the customer said there's fret buzz, so I'm trying to kind of find if there's anything wrong with that and if I need to address any frets themselves. Turns out everything was playing fairly well. And again, let's check the tuning, because there were two different tunings that the band was using for these guitars when moving into the studio. So I just wanted to make sure that I kept the correct ones at the correct tunings before moving onwards. Removing the strings, this one has a Floyd Rose, so I have blocked it off to make sure that things are the way they are. Now I am installing EMGs on this one. EMGs are something that I'm always a little bit unfamiliar with, and especially when it comes down to quick connect stuff. So I decided to dig up some diagrams. Fortunately, there's a good library of diagrams to kind of choose from on the EMG website, as well as elsewhere. Now, removing all the old passive electronics, because I won't be needing any of those, and installing the fresh new ones. So a little bit of foam to act as the backing. This was the same foam that was in place for the old, I believe they were Duncan by Solar pickups, if they were. So remove those and added in these. Did need to drill out the ferrules on the wings of these pickups, because they were a little bit too small. So I had to drill those out to make room for the pickup screws themselves. As this is a V, the output jack is placed a long way away, so it's kind of hard to pull through or stick through a piece of wire. So in order for me to get the third length of wire in there, moving from passive to active stuff, you need 3 wires going to the output jack itself, which is going to be your ground, your hot, and then your battery. So I decided to create this sort of pull system. So I have one wire that's kind of pulling everything through. So I'm pulling up the old wires along with the third all the way through into the cavity using a wire, using an extra wire here. Now, as I hadn't been filming for a very long time, I ran out of battery, so I switched over to my phone camera, and I'm sorry, the quality goes down a little bit, but we'll manage. So let's get stuck into doing the electronics. There's a little bit of soldering to do when it comes to the output, and when it comes to joining up wires here and there, making sure that if there are any leads that would kind of touch each other, putting in some heat shrink just to make sure that I don't get a short circuit anywhere. So there, heat shrink, shielding off wires that would otherwise touch each other. Now, also putting a full heat shrink on top of that entire connection point just to make things a little bit nicer, a little bit more stable. There we go. And this was the wire for the output. There we go, making sure that the electronics work. So now I have everything hooked up, and before I move any further, it's just making sure by tapping a screwdriver on everything. Turns out that I had everything placed the wrong way around, so I just had to flip 2 wires around on the switch. And there we go. Now we have everything the correct way around according to the switch. And the volume works. Now, there was a little bit of an issue with this being a very small cavity, not being able to fit the battery in there, but for the time being, we'll manage the cables when this comes back to the workshop. We'll deal with routing out space for the battery later at a later point. But for the time being, we're just going to go with this jank method of taping the battery to the back of the guitar. And, you know, it works, but yeah, not something I would recommend. Get your batteries situated safely inside of a control cavity. And as with the previous guitars and instruments, cleaning up the fretboard with isopropyl alcohol and then oiling it up with fretboard conditioner before moving on to polishing up the frets themselves. Once the frets are in, time to string it up and then get to the fun task of stringing up a Floyd Rose guitar and doing all the intonation work. People always say that intonating and setting up a Floyd Rose is a pain, but honestly, just take your time with it and make sure that you're getting everything perfectly tuned up. Get all the intonation correct. There's going to be a little bit of back and forth. Get the balance correct. Now, this is very important that you're doing this when you have fresh strings in. So get the balance correct. Get everything working nicely. So once it's actually set up perfectly, you don't really need to touch it. Or the customer doesn't really need to go ahead and adjust or touch the Floyd Rose any more than that, because nobody really wants to go and do that. So as everything's working, intonation's working, electronics are working, and all in all, nice clean guitar. Make sure that the pickups are at the correct heights, make sure the action is as the customer wants, and then move on to the next one. So that's 4 down and a couple of more to go. I think I lied. I think it's 1 more to go. There is this lovely Gibson V this time around. So going from something very modern to a little bit less modern, but with some extra flavors. So this one does have EMGs installed in it, and they were having a little bit of issues with it. So just going over how the electronics are working, making sure there's anything that needs adjustment or anything that needs kind of looking into. There was some scratchiness to be found. And then just checking all the frets, if there's any fret work that needs to be done, any high spots, anything kind of fretting out when playing through every single fret. With the initial diagnostics kind of done, we're gonna go ahead and repeat the same processes that we've done over and over again, except this time we have a pick guard to deal with. So we're gonna remove that and kind of fix up all the wiring. Now there was a lot of stuff with this wiring that was kind of all over the place. It was taped together here and there. Some of the connection points weren't optimal, so I decided to kind of clean it up, put in some zip ties to kind of hold everything in place a little bit nicer, and in general just kind of check all the connection points. Turns out the pickups were also the wrong way around, so we got those switched around. We had what would usually be, I forget when it comes to EMGs, what the numbers on them are, but what would usually be a neck pickup was in the bridge position and vice versa, so we flipped those around. The battery itself was kind of free floating around here and there, so I put some foam padding around it just to kind of like not have it bounce around, especially if you're playing live. You don't really want to have the battery just floating around all over the place, so instead I put it in like a foam cover just to make it a little bit nicer and a bit more snug inside the cavity. Checking the electronics, making sure that they work, making sure that they're wired the correct way around this time around, as previously I put the switch the wrong way around. There we are. With all electronics done, it's time to screw everything back in and clean up the fretboard once again with isopropyl alcohol, and then oil it up with fretboard conditioner. It's starting to get to that point where everything becomes very repetitive, but once you've done it a good few times over, it's a breeze. Checking with the fret rocker if there's any high spots that need taking care of. There was a little bit, once again, on the 11th fret, just making sure if it's actually popped up or not. And it turns out that it was just okay. Didn't really need to do too much to it. Nothing that would affect playing all that much. And something that can be looked at, if need be, at a later date. So oiling up the fretboard with fretboard conditioner, as I mentioned, and then finishing up polishing all the frets up with some fret polishing abrasives, and yeah, getting everything looking and feeling really, really nice. Make sure that the intonation is on point and things are playing the way we want it to. But all in all, like mentioned, there was quite a bit of like small repetition here and there. I say small, but every guitar has to go through certain necessary steps. Check the action, check the electronics, overall have a look at how everything's working, and then finally set to work. Cleaning everything up as you go, making sure the fretboard's nice, making sure the frets are nice, and making sure the electronics work. Finally intonate, do the setup, do the action as the customer wants, and there we have it. It is actually quite simple enough to getting instruments playing as good as possible. And of course, at the end of the day, once everything's done, clean up your work surface, and that just makes it easier for you to do your next maintenance job whenever that may come around. Until next time, bye.